Coming up, President Yoon is set to take off for his second overseas trip this weekend. The presidential office says he will be heading to the United Nations General Assembly in New York and will deliver a speech there, possibly with a focus on North Korea's denuclearization and Yoon's proposed audacious initiative. Before the General Assembly, President Yoon will be heading to London for Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. He will be getting to the venue by bus along with other world leaders, as the UK government has told those attending they can't use private cars. The 74th Primetime Emmy Awards ceremony is set to take place in the coming hours. South Korean Netflix series Squid Game is nominated for 6 awards, including Best Drama Series. What else to expect from the renowned TV awards? Stay with us.
Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. We begin with the plans for South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's second overseas trip since he took office. President Yoon is set for a 7-day trip, including a visit to New York for the UN General Assembly.
But before that, he will head to London on Sunday to join other world leaders in bidding farewell to the Queen. Our editor-in-chief Moon Gun-young starts us off this morning.
President Yoon Suk-yeol will embark on his second overseas trip as president this Sunday, during which he'll attend the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II in London, take part in his first United Nations General Assembly in New York, and hold a bilateral summit with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Canada. The president's national security advisor Kim Sung-han unveiled plans for Yoon's 7-day, 5-night international tour on Monday.
During this tour, the president will focus on strengthening solidarity with partner countries that share key values and expanding our platform in economic diplomacy.
The South Korean president's Air Force One will be wheels up on Sunday the 18th for London for President Yoon to attend the state funeral for the Queen on Monday the 19th at Westminster Abbey with his wife, First Lady Kim Gun-hee. There, he'll be joined by scores of other world leaders facing the prospect of being asked to catch a coach service to the venue after the UK government issued a guidance that attendees will be banned from arriving in private transport. His attendance will mark the first time that a sitting South Korean president will attend the funeral of another head of state since 2015. Yoon will then travel to New York to take part in his first United Nations General Assembly, where he's set to deliver a speech on Tuesday, the 20th. There, the South Korean leader is expected to reiterate his call for the denuclearization of North Korea, among others. All eyes are on whether Yoon will disclose more details of his audacious initiative to offer Pyongyang economic aid in exchange for denuclearization steps. Bilaterals or polo-sides with U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida are also in the works, as there are key issues to be ironed out between the leaders, including the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. In the third and final leg of his tour, Canada, Yoon will meet with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to discuss ways to boost cooperation in economic security, particularly involving Canada's production of resources like lithium, nickel, and cobalt required in manufacturing secondary batteries and electric vehicles, as well as the AI industry. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News.
IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi says there are signs that uranium enrichment facilities at North Korea's Yongbyon nuclear complex is still operational, while construction work is being carried out at the site. In a statement to the United Nations Nuclear Watchdog's Board of Governors Monday, Grossi said there are indications that the centrifuge enrichment facility at Yongbyon is operational, while the building is now externally complete. He added that the regime also expanded available floor space at the building by approximately 1/3. He went on to say that there are also ongoing indications of activities at the Kangson complex and the Pyeongsan uranium mine and concentration plant. His comments come amid speculation that North Korea appears to be preparing for what would be its first nuclear test since 2017.
South Korea reported 54,731 new COVID-19 cases as of 9 p.m. Monday, the final day of the Chuseok holiday. This was an on-day increase of over 19,000. Health experts forecast the number of new COVID-19 infections could increase for the next several days as people head to testing centers after the long holiday weekend. Nevertheless, they added that the country would witness a clear downward trend of new cases going forward. The mourning of Queen Elizabeth continues across the United Kingdom. On Monday, a service of remembrance took place in Edinburgh, Scotland, where the Queen will lie at rest until Tuesday. Song Yoo-jin has the latest.
The United Kingdom continues to say goodbye to its longest reigning monarch. On Monday, Queen Elizabeth's 4 children held a silent vigil known as the Vigil of the Princes at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, Scotland. With their heads bowed, King Charles III, Princess Anne, Princes Andrew and Edward positioned themselves at each side of their mother's coffin and stood guard for 10 minutes. The crown of Scotland was placed on the coffin, which was draped in the royal standard of the United Kingdom. The coffin had been brought to the cathedral earlier in the day from the Palace of Holyrood House, the monarch's official residence in Scotland. Thousands of people gathered to watch the Queen's final journey down the Royal Mile, with the royal family members walking behind the hearse. An estimated 20,000 mourners lined up all day to enter the cathedral, where Britain's longest-serving monarch is lying at rest, to pay their final respects. Officials say the public will be welcomed into the cathedral until Tuesday afternoon.
We've been on the go since 4 o'clock this morning and we started queuing about 8 o'clock down at the Meadows to get these wristbands to get in. But it's been worth it. It's been worth it. It's a memory we'll never forget.
And we've travelled up from Durham and you pay that ultimate respect to someone who's led us, guided us with humanity and courage, and then to see her like lying in state like that, just it's the awe of it all.
The Queen's coffin will be flown to London on Tuesday evening. It will then travel to Buckingham Palace, where it will be met by the King and Queen Consort. From Wednesday, the Queen will once again lay in state, this time at Westminster Hall. The late monarch's coffin will remain there until Monday, September 19th, the day of her state funeral. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. The 77th session of the UN General Assembly begins in New York on Tuesday.
There's certainly going to be a lot for world leaders to discuss, with the prolonged war in Ukraine and climate change causing floods and heat waves across the globe. So what topics in particular will be on the agenda that the public will need to pay attention to? For more, we have Professor Han Chattel of Yonsei University with us. Very good good afternoon to you, Professor. And well, first off, this General Assembly, it comes at a very crucial time due to many things. And well, what do you think are some of the most important topics that leaders are going to focus on when they gather together next week?
Well, Seon, a couple of the topics might very well surprise you. One focus, despite all those hotspots that you just mentioned around the world, one focus actually at this General Assembly meeting is going to be education. The theme of the event is actually titled Transforming Education, and as you may well know, the UN is often very concerned about trying to improve basic quality of life issues for people around the world, and improving access to education and also improving the quality of education, especially in the developing world, in poorer countries, is said to be an important theme of this upcoming summit. And I understand from the news coverage that they're also going to be focusing a lot on the rights and well-being of minority groups around the world as well. Though for sure you can expect that Russia's invasion of Ukraine will also be a focus, especially on the sidelines with all the world leaders attending, and of course the state of the COVID-19 pandemic, 2.5 years into this and 6.5 million deaths. I think there'll be conversation, at least, if not any further steps, on how better to respond globally to pandemics in the future. God forbid we get further anytime soon. And of course, the ongoing climate crisis always comes up at events such as these.
Right, and going down to something that has been going on, the U.S., according to reports, has not been issuing visas to Russian officials trying to visit New York for UN-related events prior to the General Assembly. How do you think this will contribute to tensions as we near the actual summit next week?
You know, I'm honestly not sure, Doyen. We've not heard much on this topic since September 2nd, so it's been about 10 days since the news coverage really broke open on this particular issue that I believe 56 Russian diplomats, including Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, have not yet been issued visas by the United States to enter into New York City. It's hard to believe that Russia would be completely shut out of this summit, but there are two big problems. And one is the invasion of Ukraine, and that, of course, has alienated the international community, all the more in a sense, since Russia is, one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, even, wielding veto power on that. So for Russia to stick to first of all, carry out the invasion of Ukraine and stick to it after all this time in the face of such pressure is really saying something. And also there's another problem. U.S. officials have made the point that since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia has also disrupted business at the U.S. Embassy, mainly forcing the U.S. to remove certain key officials from the embassy, especially local Russian staff that had been at the embassy that had to be let go after the invasion. So there's some unresolved diplomatic issues, not just with the invasion of Ukraine, but some accompanying trouble with the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. And it's not clear if the U.S. is holding out for some concessions from Russia on that diplomatic front, or if the U.S. and its allies, in a sense, are looking for further concessions from Russia. So we'll see. Hard to say how this one will be resolved at this point in time. We'll probably find out at the very last minute.
And of course, Professor, global unity is what we really want to see during this tumultuous time, but that obviously looks a little impossible during this General Assembly, where leaders will be making their keynote speeches as well. But what do you hope to what kind of messages do you hope to hear as we see this ongoing war with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the passing of the late British Queen, and this lack of, I suppose, constant in the world that we're now seeing a sore lack of?
Mostly Liz Truss, the new British Prime Minister, will be making her debut at the General Assembly, so I'm sure that she'll make some sort of reference to the passing of the Queen. And of course, the British, since they left the European Union a couple of years ago, are very keen to try to articulate their continued profile, their continued strong role in the world, despite the fact that they're not in the EU any longer. So I would think Liz Truss will probably make some statements about the passing of the Queen, yet the endurance of the British Commonwealth, and the idea that Britain will continue to try to play a role in the world sustaining human rights. She may make a mention about efforts on the part of Britain and their fellow Europeans and fellow democracies around the world to deal with climate change, probably make an expression of solidarity with Ukraine. I think you'll hear a lot of expressions of solidarity with Ukraine at the upcoming summit as world leaders take to the podium and give speech after speech. So I think Liz Truss's speech there could end up being somewhat of a highlight at this General Assembly. The question of the environment is interesting as well. Over the summer, the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly passed a resolution recognizing the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a basic human right, and they called for greater global efforts to ensure that that principle is upheld. So you'll probably see some references to that resolution again in the coming weeks. But again, resolutions from the UN General Assembly are not binding on the member states, and the UN General Assembly only can exert moral pressure in many respects, nothing further. So it's up to the countries attending this summit and their heads of state and heads of government to try to pick up the ball after this and try to step up their efforts on climate change. And of course, there are other summits and other protocols that can be expanded for that. So again, the General Assembly's powers on all these issues are limited and oftentimes very symbolic.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. I think for such a complicated topic, we couldn't have asked for a better way to put it. Well, we hope to speak to you again soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Do-yeon. See you and take care.
Well, that brings us to the end of our first half of New Day at Arirang.
But stick around for more. We'll have more stories in our second half, along with a look back on the late British Queen's legacy in the post-war era. So stay tuned.
South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduced a Korean New Year.
A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
Protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
한번 비추지 않고 내게만 가치란 그녀는 유명한 화이 서대별야 어딨나 In your eyes 걔와 함께면 넌 디스토피아 내 발걸음 따라오면 유토피아 나의 나
feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back to New Day at Arirang. Well, the Korean Netflix original series Squid Game continue to make history.
Well, we'll know the answer to that very soon, as at the Monday Primetime Emmy Awards in LA, the global smash hit is in the running for 6 main prizes, including Best Drama Series and Best Actor. Sept has the details.
Netflix smash hit Korean original series Squid Game could be about to make Emmy's history. At the 74th Primetime Emmy Awards on September 12th in Los Angeles, the Korean show is nominated for 6 of the main awards, including Best Drama Series. Squid Game could make history again if it wins Best Drama Series, after it was the first non-English language drama to even be nominated in the category. Other series competing for the same award include Severance and Succession. There's also a lot of attention on whether Squid Game will continue making history in terms of actors awards as well. Until this year, no Korean actors had even been nominated for the top 2 actor awards at the Emmys. But this time, 4 actors from the Korean series are in the running. Lee Jung-jae is one of the nominees for Best Actor for his role as the series' main character, Song Gi-hoon. Veteran actor Oh Young-soo, who plays Oh Il-nam, is nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Park Hae-soo, who plays Cho Sang-woo, and Jung Ho-yeon, who stars as North Korean defector Kang Se-byuk, are also nominated. This year's winners will be known by Tuesday morning, Korea time. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Battle lines are being redrawn in Ukraine as Russia's invasion marks 200 days. Ukrainian forces staging a massive counteroffensive in the northeastern region have taken back large swaths of territory previously under Russian control. Kim Yo-sun has more.
Marking 200 days since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine has staged a massive counteroffensive against Russian forces. In the highly anticipated counterattack, Ukrainian forces have successfully taken back large areas of territory in the northeastern region of Kharkiv, which had previously been under Russian control. In a video address, Ukrainian President hailed the latest developments, adding the country's forces were successfully continuing their active operations in several areas.
Up to now, the armed forces of Ukraine have liberated and taken control of about 30 settlements in the Kharkiv region. In a number of villages in the area, activities to check and secure the territory are ongoing. Gradually, we take over new settlements. Everywhere we return the Ukrainian flag and safety to our people.
Ukrainian authorities say joyful residents returned to former frontline villages on Monday. The country's general staff said that people are crying and joyful.
Thanks God we have it. We are grateful to our armed forces, our boys, and the courage of our heroes. Ukraine will prevail.
I'm very happy and hopeful. I'm praying to all the gods of the world for us to win and for things to calm down at least.
After thousands of Russian troops pulled back from the region, leaving behind ammunition and equipment, Moscow fired missiles at power stations on Sunday, resulting in blackouts in Kharkiv and the surrounding regions. Russian strikes continued throughout Monday, with Ukrainian authorities denouncing the attacks as retaliation against civilian targets for Moscow's military setbacks. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight. Britain and the world continue to mourn Queen Elizabeth II, who passed away on Thursday at the age of 96. The oldest-serving British monarch, whose Platinum Jubilee was celebrated just months ago, has been looked to as a rare constant in the lives of many, a steadying figure who inspired calm and dignity in the rapidly changing post-war world. Her son, the Prince of Wales, has become King Charles III, and in his first address to Parliament, the new monarch said he would follow in his mother's footsteps of selfish duty to the nation with loyalty, respect and love. As the world grieves her death and marking the end of the second Elizabethan era, we pay tribute to the legacy of Her late Majesty the Queen and discuss what's ahead for her successor. For this, we're joined by David Tizard, Professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's National University. Very warm welcome to you, David.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. And, well, it seems that time has somewhat come to a standstill in Britain at the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. And, well, how is Britain really processing this loss? What did the Queen mean to the British people?
The Queen obviously meant a great deal. I think she symbolized the nation in many, many ways. You touched on one word there just in your introduction, which was continuity. And I would just like to try to explain why that continuity was so important to Queen Elizabeth II. As she grew up, she saw her uncle, Edward VIII. He abdicated. He left the throne after less than a year on the throne. And so for Queen Elizabeth II, this was something that she didn't want to repeat. She believed that the monarch had a duty to remain a steadfast symbol, to remain something that would always be there for the British people, and didn't want to discredit, let's say, the throne by walking away from it. And that's why, despite any conversations, despite any questions about her health, despite even her son ascending to the throne now as King Charles III, as the oldest monarch to take the throne, he's now in his 70s, Queen Elizabeth was never going to walk away. And I think for many people in the United Kingdom and perhaps around the world as well, she did represent that symbol of continuity, of steadfastness, and perhaps, as we might say, a little bit of a stiff British upper lip in the face of great adversity and change.
Right, and David, the Queen, she was on the throne for most of the post-war era up to this, now what we call the fourth industrial era. And well, what were some of the many key moments that the Queen provided this calmness and this sense of keeping calm and carrying on amid very difficult times?
When we have democracies and democratic governments, we see dramatic shifts between the left and the right. We see governments rise and fall, and we also see figures of great political influence come and dominate the political scene. In the United Kingdom, this might have been Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and then a little bit later in the 90s with the rise of New Labour and Cool Britannia under Prime Minister Tony Blair, when Britain sort of regained a sense of confidence in its cultural outputs, with not BTS or Blackpink, but Blur and Oasis dominating international charts, and movies like Notting Hill, 4 Weddings and a Funeral receiving international acclaim. But also then, during this last 2 decades, where Britain's role in the international world has diminished somewhat, Queen Elizabeth II was there for all of that. And I think that's perhaps one of the advantages of a constitutional monarchy, in that where politicians will always be subject to the warp and woof these days, more than ever with social media and that intense scrutiny on their private lives, on their morals and such forth. Through all of the ups and downs, Queen Elizabeth was there. I have seen some royal historians and biographers who are saying that in 100 years, when we look back on this second Elizabethan era, it will be seen as an era of decline. And now let's be clear, that's not because of Queen Elizabeth II, but rather Britain's role in the world over the last 70 years or so has diminished from what it once was. And that's natural in the rise and fall of nations. But despite that slight declining in global influence, I believe she was able to still provide confidence and a sense of meaning and being to the British people and others around the world.
And as you said, well, despite this diminishing influence of the nation itself, it's really hard to think of a monarch as globally known and respected like the British Queen was. And what do you think really made her so prominent internationally? What does she really represent to the world?
It's a very difficult question, because I think she means different things to different people. And so, for example, what Queen Elizabeth II might mean to me might be very different from you, and it might be very different from some people in the Commonwealth countries. I was listening to the French President Macron, give his speech, a very touching and moving speech in commemoration of Queen Elizabeth II's passing. And in that speech, President Macron said to the British people, he was your queen, but to the people of France, he was just the queen. If there are queens around the world, and there have been queens in history, but Queen Elizabeth II, she seemed to encapsulate the role of queen itself. In a sense, maybe this is a little bit of too much of a British perspective, but she seemed like the queen, not just a queen, of which she was, of course, internationally. She did that for a continuity. You asked what did she mean to people around the world. Just for the sake of balance, we should say that some people have seen her as perhaps a symbol of a more traditional time in which monarchs did rule the world, and other people favored different democratic systems or republican systems in which monarchies don't play a role. So she did mean a lot of things to many people. Most of those, I believe, were positive, but of course she did represent other things to other people as well.
Well, the Queen, she was actually on the throne for as long as the Korean War. And, well, in that sense, she's been a constant over the decades to the Korean people too. And, of course, she visited the country in 1999. Well, what was the lasting impression that she really left on the country?
In my interaction with Korean people here over the last 2 decades, I've often received, warm observations about not only Queen Elizabeth II, but the royal family in general, Buckingham Palace, and the symbols that resonate out from that. Very interestingly, when the Queen did visit South Korea in 1999. One of the people that organized that tour and was part of that was Colin Crooks. Now, Colin Crooks is the current ambassador of the United Kingdom to the Republic of Korea, and over the last few days on social media, he's been leading the commemorations of her life and also the mourning that takes place. He's able to do this amazingly in both English but in fluent Korean as well, and I really think that helps bridge the gaps between the two countries. At the British Embassy from today, there is a book of mourning and commemoration that's been opened by the British Embassy where people can go and write down goodwill messages, condolences, and even personal reflections. So I think currently the British Embassy, the current ambassador Colin Crooks, they're doing really important things to keep that bond between the two countries steady, which, as you say, was created not just in the Korean War, but certainly solidified by those people standing shoulder to shoulder on the battlefield.
And well, although the nation is, of course, still grieving, her son, King Charles III, he is now the ruling monarch of Britain. And well, how do you think he's going to really conduct his engagements overseas?
This is something everybody is waiting to see. At the start of this conversation, I told you that Queen Elizabeth II, how she approached the role was greatly influenced, maybe not necessarily by her personal desires, but by her experiences with her uncle and what she saw before that. Now, as King Charles III, the ruling monarch of the United Kingdom and 14 Commonwealth countries, I'll come to that, it will be interesting to see how much of his own personal character and personality he puts into the role, or how much he goes into the title and position of king and plays the role of that titular figure. That will be very interesting to see. Now, you mentioned, or you asked about his overseas activities. King Charles III, he faced an assassination attempt in Australia in 1994. Perhaps more positively, in 1995, he was the first member of the ruling family to visit Ireland in an official capacity. And then in 1997, here in Asia, when Britain handed Hong Kong back to China, it was then Prince Charles who was there representing the throne in that handover back to Beijing. So he's had a big role in international affairs. But what I think we'll see now with King Charles III coming to the throne, we're going to see many of those 14 Commonwealth states around the world reconsider their position and ask questions. Is it time to change? Is there time for a Republican change? They will be very fraught conversations, because there will people on both sides with both their points to be made. But that's the situation that King Charles III is going to inherit, and it will be interesting to see how he navigates through these waters.
Right, and well, the royal family, it's been through some tumultuous times over the past 3 decades, during which British public opinion has become less favourable towards them generally. And the Queen was, she was very much deemed the central figure that glued everyone together. And do you think this sort of anti-monarch sentiment is going to grow stronger? How do you think the Windsors are really adapting to the times and these sort of changes in opinion?
I think the royal family, they've done their best to adapt. But let's remember, when we talk about the Queen and we talk about the King, when we talk about princes, there we're talking about roles. We're talking about symbols, and we're talking about caricatures. But the royal family are also individuals. They're humans, and just like any family around the world, they have their problems. They have those that lead better lives than others. They have those with various difficulties. So what they represent two things at the same time. They represent these symbols and these characters, but at the same time, they're people. Navigating that has been very difficult. We've seen many controversies come to light about certain members of the royal family. Few of those, if any, affected Queen Elizabeth II from a personal basis. She seemed very steadfast and upright in her character and the way she presented herself, and that is really to her credit. The world that we inhabit today, you described it as the fourth industrial revolution. We live in a world of flux and change. That once solid modernity is turning to liquid, and now we're becoming a more secular age. Whether this is good or bad, we're going to navigate it somehow. But where once we had symbols of religious symbols and pomp and majesty, those things seem to be disappearing from us around many places. And so how they navigate this will be interesting. In 100 years, will we still have royal families? And if we do or don't, will that be a good thing? If we lose them, what will we miss? If we gain them, what will we have? I think this is a conversation for people all around the world. Briefly, I'd just like to make one last point, is that many times these constitutional monarchs are associated with very traditional, very conservative and very backward ways of life. If you look on a global scale, some of the countries with the most progressive values and attitudes towards gender, towards the LGBT community, towards social welfare, towards immigration, they take place in constitutional monarchies like those that you see in Western and Northern Europe. So I think there is still a role for them in the world if we want them to be.
And on that note, how do you think King Charles III is really going to rule? Do you think he's going to mostly keep with tradition, or do you think he's going to conduct his duties somewhat differently?
This is the big unknown, because while much of what is taking place at the moment has been known for years, if not decades, the ceremonies, the funerals, the hymns that will be sung, all the majesty and the pomp, that's been put in place for a long time as people have prepared for this. But more importantly, the unknowns are: how will the British and the global international community react to this changing? And then also, what will King Charles III do in his position? Because before this, he's been a very active and outspoken person. There have been some criticisms that he's been a little bit too forceful and that he should adopt a more symbolic and constitutional position. Yet it seems, and of course I don't know King Charles III personally, but from reading about him, from those that do, he believes he's in a position to try to make the world a better place. He wants to try to impart goodness on the world, and that will be a difficult thing if he's dealing with his own personal beliefs and then his role of king. How will he go through that? That's going to be fascinating to see, because what he wants personally and perhaps what the British public want or expect, there might be a little bit of conflict there. So it will be interesting to see over the next few years how he adapts to that role.
Right, and while the royal family is not just a family, but it's an organisation really, and while with the Prince of Wales now having become the King of England, what does this mean for Prince William and Kate?
I think for Prince William, he becomes the heir apparent, and that's a new role he will have to adopt, and there will be a lot of focus on him. We saw how King Charles III often became somewhat a figure of comedic interest in how he had to wait for so long to assume the throne, one of the longest ever heir apparents in history. And as I said, that was because Queen Elizabeth II, irrespective of the situation, was not going to give up the throne, not for personal selfish desires, but because continuity, she believed, was important and didn't want to repeat what her uncle had done. For Prince William and Kate, their position will now change in a little bit. There will be more focus on them now, not just as princes, such forth, but as the heir apparent, as the person that will come next. And if King Charles III is, I believe, 73, those conversations will become more and more serious as the years go, and they will become under more public scrutiny. There will be more focus on their public lives, their personal lives, their family, their relationships. They'll feel a great pressure, I believe, to maintain at least an outward appearance of a happy family, of a relationship that doesn't contemplate divorce or separation. In our modern world, we see things such as divorce and going your own way as positive and as of development. But do we also accept and do we expect those of our royal families as well, or do they live to different standards from the rest of us? I think that's a kind of interesting conversation.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up here, but thank you very much for joining us. David Tizard, Professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's University. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you.
As Chuseok winds down in South Korea, many people are now left with piles of often unwanted gift sets. However, with food prices soaring, many have taken to reselling these items online for a little bit of extra cash. Shin-Young has more.
People in here, South Korea, have been especially feeling the burden of inflation for this year's Chuseok holiday.
We're surprised when buying groceries. Compared to the past, it costs a lot when shopping for groceries these days.
Meanwhile, as the holiday draws to a close, many people are left with often unwanted Chuseok gift sets received from family and employers. And as people continue to tighten their belts due to soaring prices, some have taken steps to clear some space on their shelves and put more cash in their pockets.
Ham, seasoned tuna, and the red ginseng are common gifts that people give and receive during Chuseok. But at the same time, they are also among the most offered items put up for sale secondhand online.
According to South Korea's secondhand e-commerce platform 중고나라, canned ham was the item most put up for sale on secondhand platforms during South Korea's main holidays, making up more than 30% of the total goods.
I used to give a fruit basket as a Chuseok gift, but it's too expensive these days. I think it's reasonable to resell and buy gifts via a second-hand market rather than just piling them up at home.
And in a sign of the times, more people are also interested in purchasing these items as they can be bought for half their original price. In response to this trend, one second-hand e-commerce platform has been promoting an event for canned ham where users can resell their gifts at a reasonable price.
As the items are sealed and be kept for a long time, demand is pretty high. Defining prices is most important when monetizing goods. We help the users to easily resell and buy Chuseok gifts like canned ham by providing a market price system within the platform.
In the meantime, one expert says that people, especially those in their 20s and 30s, tend to sell unnecessary items and buy necessities at lower prices, adding that it's a trend that is likely to continue.
Even though this trend was caused by inflation, it is expected to continue when consumers think it's convenient and reasonable.
As holiday gifts became one of the main categories in the second-hand market, companies are also planning for another event targeting other items put up for sale during next year's holiday. Shin-Young, Arirang News.
If you happen to be in South Korea and are looking for something to do during what remains of the extended holiday or afterwards or next weekend even, you might want to check out the latest exhibits at the National Folk Museum in Seoul. Our culture reporter Kim Hyun-sung went to check it out and files this report.
Imagine this. You're dozing off at a bus stop one summer's night, waiting for your ride, when suddenly you wake up in the mystical world of Korean folklore. Welcome to the mysterious village.
From dragon gods that bring rain to shape-shifting mountain gods that guard villages, the exhibit Mysterious Village guides you into the world of Korean deities. Our culture also has very fun myths. We wanted to introduce our myths and the roles of God in them. For example, the Korean goblin known as 도깨비 has a fishery myth that many people don't know about. Fishermen used to believe that the goblin 도깨비 cast a luminous blue light over the ocean. If they followed the light, they were sure to find a big catch. Korean folktales also have gods that guide over the household, and these gods are often disguised as ordinary objects.
Visitors can feel like they're part of the exhibit by using an app that uses augmented reality. If you scan the AR marker on the wall, it helps you collect a character of a Korean god. Collect all of the characters to finish the village quest.
Visitors can download the app through this QR code at the entrance of the exhibit. And this immersive experience is easy for everyone to enjoy.
Oh, it's really cool. I mean, I've been to a lot of museums and this exhibition was really interesting and different.
Fantastic. I think that it is a great way of showing more about the South Korean culture and to make tourists learn more about how do you see like these kind of topics that are exhibited here.
And this exhibit will continue until the 11th of October at the National Folk Museum inside Gyeongbokgung Palace. So take a stroll around the palace and then come dive into this mythical world. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
September 9th is celebrated in Korea as a day to celebrate hearing, and in the past 5 years, the number of people diagnosed with hearing loss has risen by 20%. A lot of them made full recoveries thanks to regular therapy. Shin Yeon sheds light on how one hospital is making rehab easier and more accessible.
Once a month, Kang Bong-sun has to come to the hospital and get regular checkups. It's been 2 years since he partially lost his hearing, and he still has to visit the hospital regularly to check up on his hearing aid and do rehabilitation exercises. Being 74, it's not that easy for him.
It's quite a lot of work, but I know it's important because if I don't get regular checkups, my hearing seems to get worse. I think we need to raise awareness of hearing loss itself to make treatment more accessible and easier to do in our daily lives.
3 out of 10 patients express discomfort even after wearing a hearing aid. Doctors said this is only natural because hearing loss requires regular monitoring and care. With that, it's the only sensory disorder that can almost be completely cured.
If the hospital is too far for patients, they tend not to come and get regular checkups. Then a problem will be found in their hearing aid. They'll also be slacking off on their rehab. Eventually, they'll lose more of their ability to hear.
Normally, as part of their rehabilitation, patients would come inside big rooms like this at the hospital. Once they're in here, they'll try to detect sounds coming from all different directions. And to save them from having to come to the hospital on a regular basis, this center has thought of a way for them to do the same exercises at home using VR technology. Patients can do the same type of exercise anytime, anywhere, as long as they have this VR headset.
Hallym University Medical Center thought VR tech would be the smartest way to help patients and hospitals. To help patients hone their ability to detect which direction sounds are coming from, a big room with many speakers and a machine is needed. But the reality is, it's difficult for hospitals to equip rooms like this because it takes up too much space.
Now hospitals don't need these big rooms or the bulky tech that runs the whole rehabilitation exercise. Instead, they can just provide VR headsets where the patients and computer do the work.
Hallym University Medical Center is now going through its final checkups before commercializing its smart invention set for next year. Shin Yeon, Arirang News.
For a look at news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Good morning. Let's start in Sweden as the country wraps up counting votes in its latest general election.
Well, that's right, Soo-young. With 95% of the vote counted so far, it appears the tables have actually turned in Swedish politics following Sunday's election. It now looks likely a right-wing coalition led by the Sweden Democrats will win the majority in parliament by a single seat. Right now, the bloc holds 49.7% of the vote, just 0.7% ahead of the opposing four-party opposition coalition. Now, if the results are confirmed, this would be the first time in 8 years that the Social Democrats would fail to lead the country's government. The final tally will be known Wednesday after votes from abroad and some early votes are counted. Sweden's general election comes as issues related to Europe's looming energy crisis, inflation, crime and immigration took center stage. Modern slavery has surged over the last 5 years. A report released on Monday by the International Labour Organization said that in 2021, 50 million people across the world were victims of forced labour or forced marriage. That figure, which is based on data from more than 180 countries, is a 25% increase from 2016 levels. The report said 28 million people had been forced into work and 22 million into marriage, an increase of 11% and 43% respectively. It said factors like climate disasters, the COVID-19 pandemic, and economic uncertainty were forcing more people into modern slavery. Now, to address the issue, the report highlights that support for victims and stronger legal protections are needed. The Ethereum blockchain's much-anticipated software upgrade is due to take place this week. Called Merge, the upgrade looks set to reduce Ethereum's energy usage, and experts say it could help stabilize the coin's price and expand its use. Following multiple delays, tracking sites anticipate the date of the upgrade to be around September 15th, although the exact date is still not known. The improved system will reportedly see a 99.5% reduction in energy consumption. It will also see significant changes to the way tokens are made and transactions are carried out. Ethereum is the second largest cryptocurrency, following Bitcoin, at a market capitalization of around $200 billion. It currently conducts around 1 million to 1.5 million transactions a day. And in our final story, the Eiffel Tower is likely to turn off its light more than an hour earlier. The move will be proposed by Paris City Hall this week and comes as Europe faces a looming energy crisis amid the war in Ukraine. The tower is currently lit up until 1 a.m., but under the proposal, the lights will be turned off at 11:45 p.m. as a gesture to raise awareness of energy use. Evening lighting accounts for 4% of the 22 megawatts of energy that the Eiffel Tower uses each day. Recently, the tower went dark to mark the death of Queen Elizabeth II.
Good morning. Let's start off with the weather updates on the season's 12th typhoon, Muifa, which is in the waters to the east of Taiwan, but will head towards the coast of central China by midweek as it picks up forward speed. So China's biggest city and Asia's major shipping hub, Shanghai, will be bracing for another major storm as the city is in the path of Muifa's torrential rain and strong winds. And due to the indirect effect of the typhoon, there's rain for Jeju and the rest of the southern provinces today with heavy showers and strong winds. Rain will spread to the rest of the country tomorrow. Now, the capital region and Gangwon-do province will be covered with lots of clouds instead, and morning temperatures are a couple of degrees higher than the same time yesterday. Then highs in Seoul will be similar to yesterday, topping out at 28 degrees Celsius this afternoon. And we will be seeing much warmer afternoon temperatures at the end of the week, with highs hovering 30 degrees Celsius in the capital. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
Well, that wraps up our newscast for this hour. We'll be back tomorrow, though, for our Wednesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks for joining us this morning, and do tune into Arirang News for updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are, and take care.